Okay, so yeah, as always, this is being recorded and will be posted online.
Awesome. Thanks for starting it out. So today we have a couple topics. We have resource timing tests from Tom, BF cache proposal from Yov, and layout shift normalization from Annie. Certainly that sounds like we'll fill up our time, but if there's anything else anybody wants to talk about, we can try to add it to the end. For the next call, Yov had proposed a slightly different format for the next one around kind of an open meeting around A/B testing. Yov, did you want to just give a quick overview about what you're thinking for that?
Sure. Essentially, I think the web performance industry is long overdue to have an open conversation about client-side A/B testing. Its unique benefits and its similarly unique downsides, and basically get everyone together in the room, or as close as we can get these days, and hash it out. So I'm basically proposing that in 2 weeks, so on Thursday, but a bit later, to also accommodate for folks that will be calling in from Japan. We'll talk about that. I sent out the agenda yesterday. We already have around 25 to 30 people who signed up. A lot of them are working group members, but a lot of them are also not folks we regularly see here, which is great. I'm also talking to a few A/B testing providers that will also be present, and hopefully also CDN folks. So on that front, Andrew, if you can be there and potentially bring folks from the edge computing side of CDNs, I think that we could potentially find some of the solution space to be in that area. So yeah, so basically I posted a link to the agenda, please sign up. Signing up is just like adding your name on the agenda, and then I'll send you an invite. But there's also like a link to the meeting in the agenda itself. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that conversation.
Sounds great. And just to be clear, we will not be having the regular this call that way in 2 weeks. And Yov, if you want to cancel that particular meeting as well, yes. Just to clear it up. And then the next version of this call would then be 2 weeks after that, which would be February 18th, it looks like, at the same time. Unless there are any objections, we will plan on that. Okay, why don't we dive into it? First up, Tom, if you don't mind kicking us off about resource timing tests.
Yeah, sure. I'm Tom. I work for Google with Annie, Yoav, and Nicholas, and the other speed metrics folks. So we noticed that resource timing has some WPT tests, but we were actually getting some bugs filed, security bugs, in fact, about cross-origin information leakage. So the idea here is we're going to touch up the tests, make sure we increase our coverage so that we catch these bugs before we ship them, and hopefully make it a little bit easier and more consistent. Because if you actually do look at the tests, they've been kind of contributed to by a bunch of different folks at a bunch of different times. So it's kind of, you know, a lot of cognitive overhead to understand every style and all that. So we thought we'd at least drop a line here in case folks are interested for maybe they want to contribute, maybe they have questions, maybe they have their own resource timing bugs that they'd like to see covered in these tests. Feel free to give me a shout. I'm just Tom McKee at google.com, or you can get a hold of Yoav, and he knows how to get in touch with me.
And Tom, is the goal to have a proposal for replacing the current test at all, or this would be just like a new superset of more standard tests covering a broader area, or?
It's just really patches to the tests we do have. Things like file renaming, things like We're using a bunch of async test calls when we should be doing like promise test calls, stuff like that. But also, once we have it organized, we're going to work to make sure we are covering all the edge cases. There's a lot of edge cases around timing allow origin header, matching and all that stuff. So once it's in kind of a consistent state, that's when we can extend it with more coverage. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And do you have either like a GitHub issue to like start the tracking of this, or like a doc or something that to like lay out all the different places that you think are missing, where people may want to review the list to make sure, or to see if they want to contribute or anything like that?
Yeah, I think we have a doc on the go, Yoav. I'm not sure if it's public or not, but certainly that'd be a great place to start. And I think opening a GitHub issue on the resource timing repo would be a good way to collaborate. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It'd be a good place to start it out, at least like a starting point, and then people can find other documents from there, or figure out how to get a hold of you and everything. So yeah, if you want to file a GitHub issue, and we can always include that in the meeting agenda notes afterward as well, and so people that are interested can pay attention to that.
Awesome.
Sounds great. Any other thoughts or questions about that initiative? Okay. Thank you, Tom. Why don't we move forward to Yoav for a proposal that he has on BF Cache?
Sure.
And I will take over scribing.
Thank you. Let me just share a tab. Okay. So essentially, we've discussed this at TPAC, and this is, we discussed multiple options, picked one of them, and this is a more concrete version of that same proposal. That is something that it's been on my mind for a while. So previously, we talked about the fact that we want to align our metrics with user experience, and that includes BF cache navigations, which right now are more or less invisible, and we want to make them visible to RUM. That means firing new entries for navigation timing and other timing rather than overriding them, which we briefly discussed and excluded. We want to have single time origin for all navigations, and we agreed that refiring new navigation timing entries and adding more entries to the buffer is the right way to go. So I thought a bit about what those new navigation timing entries may look like, and it seems like the best path forward would be a new navigation type. We already have a few of them. Adding a new one shouldn't be too much of a concern from a compat perspective. We then can queue those new entries on both Performance Timeline and Performance Observer for people that observe navigation timing, but obviously not updating the L1 performance interface, which is deprecated.
And that's performance.timing.
Yeah.
You're saying, right?
Yeah, the performance.timing one. Yeah.
Yep,
yeah. Yeah, the way that I thought of extending the navigation type would be to simply add another value, so back-forward cache, to distinguish it from the current back-forward value, which is defined as a history navigation that is not a BF cache navigation. Ideally, we would have slightly different names, but I'm reluctant to rename the back-forward one. So I think like adding the cache, adding cache to the name will enable people to distinguish between those two cases. But I'm happy to hear more opinions on that and bike chatting around that. In terms of spec changes, it seems like for that particular part, we would need to queue a performance navigation timing entry from HTML's history traversal algorithm, but not a whole lot more than that. And then that particular navigation timing entry will be assigned with that particular type. And yeah, and we'll also need to define what that new type is. Okay, and then there's the subject of adding a new paint timing entry, because on top of just knowing that the navigation happened, we want to know when content was painted on screen after that. So what I was thinking there is to add a new entry name. So we have first paint, we have first contentful paint, and now we'll have a back-forward cache paint. And again, this is very much open to bike shedding. This will be queued when a first paint occurs after a BF cache navigation happens. And in terms of spec changes, we will probably need to add an extra flag on the document that is set to true in the history traversal algorithm that is indicating that a BF cache paint should be reported, and then add a step to mark paint timing in the paint timing spec that will queue that entry when that flag is set and unset the flag. So how will developers be able to use this? This is an example that is identical to the one I showed at TPAC. Essentially, we'll have multiple navigation entries, and developers can pick up the start and end time for the navigation from those multiple entries, and then figure out the paint entries that are related to a particular navigation by filtering on them. Basically filtering between that start and end time for those BF cache navigations. They'll be able to pick up the relevant BF cache paint.
And in that example, you're picking up the paint from the first navigation, or the first time through, you'd be picking up the paint from the first navigation. Okay, I see it's in a loop now. Sorry. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Essentially, this is the broader outline. Like here, I'm essentially filling out the paint for
anything from start time to start time. Any paints within that range.
Yes. Yeah, and it's true that we can filter it down to BF cache paints or something along those lines. Okay. Yeah. Okay. On top of that, there's also the subject of first input delay, and there are multiple options there. So one which I tend to favor the most is to fire those entries. So the first event or the first input event after BF cache navigation will be reported as an event timing. It's just that we'll reduce the threshold that we typically use for event timing in order to consistently report that. And that will enable developers to know that the first event timing entry after a BF cache nav would be the equivalent to a first input. Potentially, we also want to somehow mark that event timing entry with, with that information that enables, other types of filtering that are not solely time-based. Another option would be to fire multiple first input delay entries. that may be confusing. It needs some webcompat research, but that's not like the webcompat part is not really scary to me. Also, I didn't mention that, but for also for paint timing and for firing more paint timing entries, that's also something I did compat research on, and it seemed to be web compatible. Very few analytics providers collect unknown entries that may or may not cause them to misinterpret the results. So it's perfectly safe to fire more paint timing entries from with a new name. I'm not like if we choose to go that route and choose to fire more than one first input entry, I'll need to do similar research there, but I suspect that it will be fine. The main concern there from my perspective is that it may be confusing to developers, but I'm curious to hear y'all's thoughts on that. And then the third option is come up with a new entry type for a BF cache first input, which would mean that if folks want to observe that, they need to observe yet another entry, and that may not be great. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that. And finally, for LCP, because the LCP in the BF cache navigation case is highly likely to just be identical to the first pane there, it makes sense to not refire it. I looked into what it would take. It's possible. It adds some complexity, and it seems like something we can ignore for now, but we'll probably need to tackle what happens with LCP in the future if we come up with new navigation types, such as soft navigations for SPAs. And with that, I am out of slides, but yeah, like I said, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on FID, and other than that, various bike shedding related arguments. Thanks.
Yoav, so for paint timing, have you thought about expanding existing first paint a little bit, like to having an attribute saying this is for BF cache instead of creating a new paint timing entry?
So I thought about, it's not, so instead of, we're not creating a new type of entry, we're just adding a new name to the list of names. So it's the same paint entry. Observers have to observe a single paint type, and then they get first paint, first contentful paint, as well as this new BF cache paint. I thought about just refiring first paint, but there are some compatibility concerns with the fact that people will collect that as their first paint potentially, and that may or may not confuse current analytic providers. So it seemed like choosing a new name would be more cautious.
Cool, thanks. I think I misunderstood. I understood. Yeah, that makes sense. Another question I have for reducing the threshold for FID. Have you thought about what the threshold would be for that? Because I also recall during TPAC, we said something like the current bar is already too low, for the threshold. So it wasn't that useful. So I wonder if we keep reducing it even further, even just for BF cache, would that still having the same issue?
Yeah, so I think it's, I'm talking about maybe a different threshold. So I'm not talking about the threshold of what is a good FID versus bad FID. I talked about the threshold for event timing, that right now we don't fire event timing entries for every input event, but just for ones that we consider slow, for the threshold of slow events, which I believe is 50 milliseconds or 52. I don't remember. Like, there was some weird thing about rounding to 8 milliseconds there. And we discussed making that threshold customizable up to a certain point. And what I'm suggesting here is that after a BF cache, we'll always fire an event timing entry, regardless of how long it took for that event to be processed. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay.
Yo, are you aware of any analytics providers or packages that do significant or try to attempt to monitor BF cache navigations today?
I am not aware of that happening. If folks would want to do that, they would need to monitor the page show and page hide events. So there are no entries. You need to actively register those events, which is a bit of a higher bar. But yeah, but feasible. And yeah, I'm not aware of anyone doing that today.
Towards your question of for like first input delay, if we like kind of how that looks. I think the third option was mentioning a new entry type that you would have to listen to specifically to hear more about BF cache changes.
Yeah.
It almost seems to me like from a compatibility perspective, if there's some analytics provider or package or somebody that has very little or no insight about BF cache today, if they're going to be updating their code anyway to care about it, it seems reasonable that they would intentionally then listen to more entry types to get more data about this new event that they're listening to. So it doesn't seem to me too awkward to require a developer to be explicit about listening for BF cache style events, rather than the opposite, which would be somebody not intentionally listening for them and getting them, and the code doesn't know how to deal with it.
Yeah. So to me, the main deterrent with that option is that it would be something unique for FID here, where for navigation timing, we're planning to just fire entries. For paint timing, we're planning to fire entries. And then for FID, you need to add a special observer. I think that if we were to just fire those event timing entries with lower thresholds, yeah, analytics providers may be potentially confused about why those events fired, because they can be potentially fast.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. You're saying for consistency, the other types of events are more just like a new name, not necessarily a new entry type.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my thinking. And yeah, and if I understand what you're saying correctly, is that if we don't do that, people will potentially be confused if they don't take BF cache into account.
Potentially.
Yeah, and maybe we can diffuse some of that confusion by marking those event timing entries as a BF cache event timing
right.
thing. And yeah. so we can add a new, I don't know if name is the, like, what's the best place to hang that, but yeah, we could do that.
Name is used for the type already.
Yeah. Yeah, we could figure out a new attribute for that, but it's, yeah.
Nicholas, can you say that again? What's the type in this case? What are the different types?
Sorry, I don't know if you can hear me properly. I'm using another microphone. It's event type, like mouse down, click.
Okay. For event timing specifically, you're saying we already use that. Gotcha.
Right. So.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah. Oh, and the difference between, yeah. Yeah, so anyone with strong opinions regarding those two options, thoughts, or three options, I guess? Yeah.
Hey, Yoav, I have a question not about that, but about that last bullet point on the LCP slide where you're talking about, like, do we refire LCP, FCP, FP on the nav case? And for future navigation types, i.e. spa navigation, what are we going to do? So I want to kind of think through this, assuming we have other navigation types besides back forward cache, and that includes some of the things we know we need. And I'm wondering if you can kind of generalize this to that. Like, for me, it seems safer to say that we are going to refire all this stuff instead of special casing just BF cache. Because I think in the spa navigation case, you would have to refire those.
I agree that in the spa navigation case, we'll have to refire those. I don't think we have enough insight into what that would look like, the spa navigation case. And I'm concerned about solving a problem we don't yet fully understand here with LCP. Because for BF cache, if we were to refire LCP, like I have a sketch design of what the spec changes would look like, but then developers will have like the part that I'm mostly struggling with is how will developers be able to distinguish LCP for navigation 1 from LCP to navigation 2. And I think that would potentially differ depending on the shape of the API that will land on for SPAs. And deciding on that before we are actually, like, before we're confident solving the SPA problem, because I'm currently, I don't know what the API shape would look like. It seems premature. So I don't think there are advantages to solving this problem. Like, it's a problem we'll need to solve. I don't see the advantages of solving it now versus solving it once it's more relevant. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. I mean, I think the flip side of that would be we're introducing a special case for a special nav for certain metrics. I think that adds a lot of overhead when we're describing this to actual developers, not committee members. So for me, it seems harmless to just treat them consistently, if only to simplify the mental model here. But, opinions may differ. I agree. We don't want to like make crazy abstract interfaces, but I'm just saying, like, to me, it seems like the path of least resistance is to refire and then maybe refire for SPOS 2, and then we have an advantage of consistency. But, not everybody's super keen on consistency, so say la vie.
Yeah, for LCP though, you can't just refire the entry because to compute it, you need to iterate over all the entries and use the last one. So that would definitely be a breaking change. So it would need to be a different entry type.
So did you think about adding another, maybe like property that would indicate the type of LCP or the type of timing? So for this case, it would be BF cache, but for the SPA cases in the future, it would be whatever we can be defined, something else. Is that something consider?
Potentially, I think maybe it may. So the problem is that right now, the current libraries that collect LCP and the advice we give the developers that want to collect LCP is just iterate over the array until find the last entry, and that is your LCP. And once we introduce new navigations, like other navigations on top of that, that will change. So maybe what we should be doing, like, is to think about ways like that we can change that, like the current libraries and developer advice, to make it so that future LCP entries that we may want to add will be compatible, and start working on that now without necessarily, like, potentially without tying that to BF cache, but just making sure that adding more LCP entries is future compat.
So the main concern is that it will be challenging to communicate the new guidance, I guess.
Actually, it would be challenging to actually get people to change their website to the new guidance, and then because our web compatibility changes are hard. It may make sense to, if we were to introduce a new type on the LCP entries, we can tell people to, check for the type or check for Boolean, or I know that Nicholas had thoughts about final LCP, which would be potentially easier from a compat perspective in those cases. So maybe.
Well, we decided it's not something that would be usable by most analytics providers, since they check on unload and final won't be ready by then. So that's not a viable approach.
I guess one option would be to make it opt-in, right? If there's some API to enable these additional navigations.
So that would be the equivalent of a new entry type, and then people would observe that entry type specifically. Which is what more or less what Nicholas was proposing.
No, I'm saying we couldn't just have like a new function and a performance, for example, where you just call it to observe more navigation times, right?
Okay.
Like we don't.
So like an observe parameter, like the buffered flag.
No, just like
a global opt-in.
yeah, exactly.
I want data after
Yeah.
sometime. And kind of related to that, I'm curious how many analytics providers actually do anything after they've detected either page hide or I guess that would be the main one here, page hide event. For example, for Boomerang, we generally shut down a lot of our monitoring and stuff, so we wouldn't necessarily get tripped up if the user comes back because we've stopped monitoring anyways. For many cases. So I'm wondering, are other analytics packages similar to that, or are they going to get confused with all these new entries appearing after a page hide and then page show? Or is it okay to just start firing them because only the ones that know and care would actually be the ones paying attention again? I'm not sure.
Yeah. So it may make sense to start collecting data on that and see if anyone, like, yes, this is true. Like if no one is calling like the observers, if everyone are shutting down their observers after BF cache navigations, then yes, we can add whatever we want in those cases. I wouldn't want to block the initial BF cache case for like the initial BF cache changes that we know what we want them to look like for this, but maybe we can start thinking about measuring that part, measuring people who observe and touch performance entries after BF cache navigations, or for the SPA case, maybe this is also something we can measure after something happened on the page.
So I kind of echo a point made by Mosaic, which is that I think we would also be uncomfortable adding this specific solution for BF caching later, maybe next year or a couple of years from now, we come up with yet another solution for SPA. I think we need to figure out a generic solution that supports both. Like we shouldn't be just keep adding random new solutions to each problem we encounter in the new year, right? Like we need to have a platform consistency, and every new type and every new solution we add to the platform has more complexity for new developers to having to overcome. We should be trying to reduce the complexity of the platform, not to increase it.
Sure. At the same time, I don't think that if we simply say that LCP doesn't fire in BF cache cases because it doesn't really make sense in those cases, that I don't think that increases the developer complexity in this specific case. And it's also something that we can later on add if we consider it reasonable to add.
I'm not just talking about LCP. I'm talking about like overall proposal.
Okay.
So maybe it could be good to highlight how it would be extended for other types of navigations, like sub-navigations, portals, or whatever. Like show that it is extensible to other use cases besides BF cache, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, like let's say we decided that okay, the best way to solve the BF cache is that a new types, right? Then we don't want to like get to the situation where a couple of years later, like we have that yet another new types for other types of navigation. Like it, like we need to have a consistent story here, right?
Yeah, sure, but maybe we're running a bit out of time here. But just to, I think that yes, we already have 4 navigation types. Now we're adding a 5th, and it seems reasonable that we'll add a 6th once one is needed. Same for paint timing entry, where it's yeah, we already have first paint and first contentful paint, and now we'll add a 3rd to that. So I don't think that those additions for navigation timing and for paint timing are somehow inconsistent with what we have today. I agree that like when we look at FID, we need to make sure that whatever we do there is consistent with what currently happens with either event timing or which is why I'm more favorable of either like firing more of what we already have, either event timing or first input, rather than adding another.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily saying like the specific things you're proposing is bad. I'm just saying we should figure out how other types would fit into this picture, right?
Yeah, that generally makes sense. Cool.
So we can certainly iterate on this a little bit more if people want, or I know that Annie wanted to chat about layout shift normalization as well. And Annie, I don't know if 15 minutes is enough time for you to bring it up, or if you want to have more time at a future meeting.
Yeah, maybe we can skip to a future meeting. I'm not sure how long we might want to discuss.
Okay, that's fine. And apologies that we didn't have a chance to get to it today. So if we do have, we have another 13 minutes or so till the end of the hour. Do we want to think through a little bit more about the BF Cache stuff?
I know that we have a lot of interest from Yoav and other people on my team about just how all the different types of navigations do fit together. Are there other people that are interested in this topic that might want to spin up some time to work together on it? Does that sound like a good next step?
Seems like a great idea to me, and I'm certainly interested as a analytics provider as well.
Benjamin, I see you raise your hand. Awesome.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested, Annie, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'd love to get more perspective outside of kind of what we're thinking in our heads.
Yeah.
Broader consensus, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I know the bias is on the BF Cache right now, but we're looking ahead to SPOS. So yeah, we would love to see kind of like a grid of working with you to establish a grid of navigation types and what the constraints are on these metrics. I think just to explain it to ourselves and to our colleagues, I think it would be very helpful.
Yeah. So maybe if we, yeah. I think it generally makes sense. I think that generally we have like the various performance entries have some like consistency problem. For example, like name is used for different things in different entries, and it may like for web compatibility, we'll have a hard time dropping what is currently shipped, but maybe we can figure out a way for people to move away from that. Although that always runs a risk of, the N+1 problem, where we just add a new thing, we can't drop the old thing, and then we have inconsistency between those two. I don't know if this is, but yeah, generally working on the consistency problem makes sense. Like I said, I tried to work with the current mechanisms for each one of those entries when adding a new one. It would have been good if we had a single mechanism for all entries in which we can use. So instead of using name in one and type in the other, if we could use like single one, that would have been better, but that's not.
There was Ryosuke's idea to just have a method, and that is a single mechanism, right? So there are ways to do it.
Add a method of move me to the new type of entries, and then we drop name and do something else with it? Or
why do we need to change the name? Like,
no, it's just that the entry name is, for me, one of the biggest like sources of inconsistency, because it's used for different things. So in resource timing, it's the URL. In navigation timing, it's document. In other, like, it's used for different things. So, but I'm not sure, like, yeah, maybe you can, so maybe I misunderstood what you were saying.
oh, sorry, I thought you meant the problem of adding the new entries for BF navigations or other sorts of navigations. And maybe you're talking about something else.
No, I think that adding new entries is fine. I think that the fact that, you know, we can't consistently use a single attribute for all of them to signify this is a new entry. This is.
I mean, you can always add a new attribute to performance entry.
We could always add a new attribute that points to the navigation timing entry that it belongs to. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Other than that, on the subject of BF cache, any other thoughts? Bike shedding in terms of the attribute names or whatnot?
So one edge case you have to consider, or rather not really you, but we have to consider is when the BF cache navigation happens while other forms of navigations are ongoing.
Okay. So that the BF cache navigation time will be somewhere after the start time of a different navigation, but before the end time of that navigation?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's actually like more common than we like, you know. It actually happens a lot.
Yeah, so maybe we shouldn't rely on the navigation timing start times to know what's the navigation that corresponds to the entry.
And it's okay, you're talking about both. I mean, that could happen just during a normal navigation before the load event fires or whatever. You could, I guess, BF cache navigate, but it could also happen with like for a type that we don't have yet, which is more of like a soft navigation within a site, certainly.
Yeah, right. I mean, well, I think the most common way would happen is like user clicks on something and realize, oh, I don't want to go there. I'm gonna just go back, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a good point. There could be overlapping navigations happening.
So, yeah, so Nick, your idea about, pointing to the navigation, like the relevant navigation timing entry is
something like that.
Support that, but yeah.
the latest navigation down the stack.
Yeah. Interesting.
It seems to me like there's a balance here that we're trying to thread of not confusing existing applications and scripts out there, and being able to add data that we want to support these new scenarios. And if we're really just concerned about not confusing existing analytics, I think the easiest way is just to make these all new things that you have to listen for, and then you just don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
That leads to your whole N+1 problem thing, where there's always like additional things to pay attention to and stuff. But maybe that will help break the logjam of us being concerned about, well, how is this app going to respond, or how is this analytics package going to respond? Because they just, they wouldn't have visibility into the new things.
Yeah.
Not saying that's the right choice. I'm just trying to verbalize what we've been going back and forth on for a little while.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think I'm not saying that I don't have a bandwidth to do this, but like, I think one interesting thing is there's some sort of study of how the different forms of navigation happens within a given website, like soft navigation as well as the BF cache navigations and other other forms of things that's happening. And there are cases where things are overlapping. There are cases that's no overlapping. But I think we need to come up with some sort of like a mental model of how all these navigations happens, in order for us to come up with a sensible API for observing each type, right? Because at the end of the day, like we need to make sure like whatever the page observes actually makes sense. Like we need to make sure the API is such that when you get the data, you can discern different kinds of navigations. If navigations are happening within another navigations, we want to make sure like scripts don't get confused about, for example, like which navigation the first main corresponds to and so forth, or like a resource resource timing.
Yeah. So direct pointer would be a way to clearly disambiguate that. But it's also something we don't have on current entries. So that will force us to make that choice of creating new entries that people will have to explicitly observe.
So let me give you an example, right? In the case of soft navigation, like let's say you're on some page A and you go to B, right? And the user immediately goes back to A. In that case, it's possible that the in sort of abstract, page loading with A continued while B was being loaded, right? Because once you start fetching things from over network, you're not going to stop it per se. In a soft navigation case, often if there's any pending network request, they won't cancel it. They just like wait for the result, cache the result. In a case, the user ends up going back to the page. So in that sense, it might be that when user navigates from A to B, that navigation for A just never ends. I'm not sure if that's necessarily the right model for all the apps. I'm not saying that, but I mean, like certainly for some apps, that kind of model makes sense. So I think we need to have a better understanding of like what all these new types of navigation that may happen in the web apps, the websites that, and then how each website wants to treat them, what their models are.
Yeah. Yeah. trying to reconcile that. I don't want to, like, I explicitly don't want to have to solve everything that anyone will want to do in the future in order to, solve a problem we already have a fairly good understanding of. But yeah, getting some sense of that through, potentially talking to developers who currently ship those kinds of experiences makes general sense.
Yeah. I'm always, saying that we need to solve all those problems before we can add API for BF Cache, right? I'm just saying that we need to have some sort of mental model of like how all that stuff kind of fits together. So when we try to add those, we don't suddenly say, oh, wait a minute, we made a mistake for BF Cache, and we have to, create yet another complete new solution for it.
Yeah. That generally makes sense. Thanks.
And with that, we are out of time for the day. So thanks everybody for the discussion today. Reminder again, 2 weeks from now, we'll be doing a slightly different meeting, not at this time, but I think 2 hours later.
Yeah,
so
starting an hour from now.
Yep, on that Thursday, and then we'll resume this meeting 2 weeks after that. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.